So for those listeners who are very interested in Akha and his personality, he was almost topless like 5 minutes ago. And I feel like that's important to
Okay.
expose you because you did that on purpose and you said, I'm going to take my top off. I want that to be on the record.
Okay. Audience, listeners, people, person. I simply was hot. I said top. I meant to say jersey. It was a misnomer. I believe that's the word for it.
Sure. I'm sure they'll believe you. It wasn't even in the recording as well.
I'm wearing it. You guys, listeners, you can't see, but I'm wearing a top. I'm wearing it's a Paxson top. Paxson doesn't even exist anymore.
I mean, okay. I mean, it's
I'm saving the planet. I'm wearing old clothes.
It's your word against mine. No, but before we started recording, we were chatting about how insane Akha actually is because can you explain what it is that you do with your podcasts and how much time you've saved from doing said thing?
Oh, okay. So I use this cool podcast app. It's called Overcast. It's not a plug, but I guess it is. But there's this feature. It's called Smart Silence. And what Smart Silence does is it skips the silences in podcasts. So in audio in general. So like, that pause I just did right there would have been skipped if I was listening on Overcast. And I think I've been using Overcast since 2019, around December. Yeah, it's actually, I know that because of the episode I'm about to do. I have saved an extra 991 hours of time just because I'm skipping silences.
991 hours?
Yeah.
That's insane. Okay, I thought you were going to say 991 minutes. I was like, okay.
No.
This is driving me insane. How many podcasts do you actually
That's
listen to?
198 hours. Okay.
Yeah,
well,
we need to expose you because that's a lot of hours.
I listen to a lot of podcasts. It's crazy. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen to and even I listen to I actually like listening to like people talking or like stories and stuff because like even when I run out of podcasts to listen to, I then move on to audiobooks. Like that's how like since 2020 I've finished I think like 17 of the Dune books, and that's between podcasts and another like sci-fi series called the Volkosigan Saga. So I'm very much stuff in my ear. That's why I sound very weird. It's because I listen to very different accents all the time, and like my voice doesn't just know what to do.
You reckon that's why you sound weird? You're like fusing all of these different personalities and accents together.
I mean, why do people sound the way they sound? Isn't it because that's how they pick up how to say things and stuff? Like,
no, that's true.
I mean, one of my exes.
Again, we should actually
Shut
hang
up.
on. We need to make this a drinking game. Every time you mention one of your exes, we need to like get the listeners in on this.
Okay, so he was a Afrikaans dude, and he had like an American accent. So like some words he'd say like very American-y, and I was just like, oh, that's interesting. But I figured it's probably because he went to an all Afrikaans school. They only spoke Afrikaans there, except in English. That's where they spoke English, but not even really. And the content he'd watch was like shows and stuff, like English TV, and that's mostly American TV, and that's their English, that's their accent that he picked up. So I feel like what I listen to, over enough time affects let me just say it has affected the way I speak.
But I still think I feel like there's still that sort of original Joburg accent in you though.
Yeah, no, there's a whole mix there.
Yeah.
There's a mix there.
Yeah.
It's like, people, I've been asked like where I'm from. This dude we went to school with, he was a year below us. He was in the house we weren't in.
Yeah.
I saw him, I was in second year or third year in uni, and I got out off the jammy and the bus at UCT, and he asked me, he was like, Akha, have you been overseas recently? And I was like, no, why? And he just said that I sound like, I just sound different. My accent's different. And I was like, I don't know what to say.
And I'm wondering, do you take this as a compliment, or do you find this as just like one of those things?
I don't know. I think I like the way I sound, which is interesting because I don't like listening to myself like again. Like I don't mind, but I think I like the way I sound.
Okay.
So I don't take it as anything. I just take it as a comment. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. No, I guess I'll agree with you on the part where it's like your accent becomes an amalgamation of like all the things that you consume and all the people around you as well, which is why my accent is like very Cape Townian. Like I don't even know how else to describe it, but at the same time it's not like, it's very, at least I've been called out, it's very posh white boy.
It is very posh.
Yeah,
it is.
Cape Townian accent.
But that's the school you went to.
Yeah, exactly.
You were at Bishop's for how long?
12 years, which is kind of nuts actually.
Yo, you didn't get the 13-year tie.
I did. We got an honorary one because technically we were boarders for 12 years, which does mean we were at the school time-wise longer than the 13-year boys. Welcome listeners to the Pink Take Notice podcast. This week, you are joined by your hosts, Mukisa and Akha, and we are going to continue our conversation that we had from last week or the previous week before that. And that is the conversation around leftism and what being a leftist is and what that means. We thought that before we go into the sort of deep conversations about what leftism is, what that entails, Marxism, socialism, communism, etc., we thought we might just give you a bit of a lens into how we became leftists. Because I think, okay, you'd agree with this, we've both established that going into leftism is not the default. The default really is largely a centrist, center-right position. Socially, that's the sort of default position. And I think to become a leftist, then it means that you have to kind of engage with certain texts, with certain media, with certain forms of things that pull you away from that, as much as it would be, to go more towards the right. So we just thought that we might give you a lens into that journey that we went on that kind of allowed us to become leftists and also state that we are leftists, which I still think is a huge thing because I think many people are a bit maybe embarrassed or scared to say that they're leftists. And yeah, maybe you could also follow the same journey. Maybe you could take a look at our playbook, if that's what we can call it, and see what that's like. As a listener, you should know that the journey that we went on that led us to where we are now. And by the way, by no means are we saying that like we're finished now. This is the complete. We've done enough reading. We've done enough soul searching and engagement, and that's why we are leftists. And we can sort of pack our bags and discuss this. This is an ongoing generative process that we are engaging in. Leftism isn't strictly defined, and I mean your position on certain things will change over time, and they have for me as well. So what we're saying is it took us some time actually to become leftists. For me, it took me a couple of years of that journey. So asking you, the listeners, to become leftists after listening to one podcast might be a bit challenging. So we might as well just give you a breakdown of what we went through, right? I feel like that's a good place to start for the listeners, don't you think?
Well, that was a lovely intro. Thank you. It's a bit long, but
Oh no, the intro ended earlier. This is just now getting into the episode.
Oh, you just decided to speak?
Yeah, just going
okay,
into it.
I'm new to this podcasting thing. Okay.
So maybe we should start with the question, because I think the question itself is that we're going to be sort of engaging with today is, how did you become a leftist? What was your journey? How did you get there? And the problem with that question is that it's really difficult to sort of pin down a moment and be like, yeah, that's the exact time that I was like, yep, I'm a leftist now, this is my thing. But you apparently have a moment. So how about you share that with the listeners? So Akha, how did you become a leftist?
Listeners, I don't know if you can hear, but I'm rubbing my hands violently together. So I actually became a leftist kind of accidentally, it seems. So let me just take you on a little journey. So this is like okay, so first of all, I have my Google activity set to like never delete. Like I wanted to be able to figure out what I did at a certain point in time, no matter how long ago it was. I want to be able to I probably Googled this thing, let me see. Comes in handy when your co-host is like, let's do an episode about how we became leftists, because I know that it started with podcasts. In particular, it started with the Citations Needed podcast. So like on the 5th of November, 2019, I read an article by Wired, surprisingly enough, about the best podcasts. And the next day, I visited Citations Needed on Apple Podcasts, and I guess it was a love at first sight. I know I'm kind of a completionist, so at the point I started, I know I caught up to their back catalogue, because when I started listening to podcasts, I had spare time and I'd literally complete the whole back catalogue and then catch up, and then start a new one and then do their whole back catalogue and catch up. So basically started with Citations Needed, and what I guess I got from there was a very good basis on not very good because it's initially, right? An intro to like media analysis and why things are reported the way they are. And in covering that, as they do, you end up talking about power structures and motivations and class hierarchies. And I mean, there's also race is also a component, but I got exposed to all these things, and thinkers such as Noam Chomsky, for one, manufacturing consent, OG dude. I guess I started there. That was the start of my intro, and then along with the podcast, I started reading a few books and stuff. But I guess that's like we could just.
Well, I want to interject because you mentioned that you started this off from a Wired article. What was the Wired article about? And had you been? I mean, you said it's about podcasts in particular and the best podcasts, but had you shown an interest in in podcasts before that? Were you listening to them, or was this purely your first sort of foray into it, and you just stumbled upon this podcast that led you down this path?
That is an awesome question. I started, I guess, listening to Serial. I think must have been one of the first podcasts I listened to.
Phenomenal podcast.
But yeah, I started listening to like some, I don't know, do you know Invisibilia, Note to Self, stuff you should know, just general like lib type, general interest podcasts type stuff. And I guess once I wanted more, you know, do you know me though? I just want more capitalism, you know. That is my profit motive, but podcasts is me.
You're a podcast capitalist.
Yeah, literally. I literally just Googled best podcasts, and I think that's what took me to the Wired article, and that's how I found Citations Needed. And I think, yeah, that was that. I just felt like I don't remember the spur of listening, because I used to be a music head. I used to always listen to music. Like music was always playing. I had my home pod that was playing music when Siri play this thing. I think I just like wanted to learn things, and there'd always been questions like, I mean, things like are controversial, like for example Israel Palestine, and I don't know, like feeling disenchanted after, I guess, what happened around 2019? Because I guess I started listening to Citations Needed in November 2019.
Okay.
And I started getting interested in Noam Chomsky. I think I read the first of his books. I read beginning of 2020 on Palestine, literally. I wanted an answer to that. I was like, this is a thing that like I have heard a lot about, and I don't know what is happening here.
Yeah.
And I trust Noam because of his work with manufacturing consent, and I guess generally he is held to a decently high regard among like the leftist community, among people on the left, let's say. And yeah, I think that was just the spur of it. Like once you get into, I guess, once I got into media analysis, and then Israel Palestine, and then I just wanted more, I guess. Just like there's more to understand, there's more to learn. I mean, Noam has a lot. I mean, I've read a lot of. Should I list the books I read? Because I read them like one after the other.
You can, yeah, go ahead and list them. And for the listeners, we will put the books in the show notes. We'll try to link them so that you can go and purchase them. But yeah, go ahead with the list.
And I was a voracious reader. Jesus, I read like Noam Chomsky on Palestine. That was like 6th of Jan 2020. 9th of Jan 2020 was 10 Myths About Israel. then the 13th of Jan was How the World Works. Oh, sorry. The 10 Myths About Israel is by Ilan Pappé, and Ilan Pappé he's an Israeli author. Then I read like on Anarchism by Noam Chomsky as well as Who Rules the World by Noam Chomsky. And then I think I took a break from leftism because I started reading Catch and Kill by Ronan Farrow, which was about...
It was about the Me Too movement and Harvey Weinstein.
That's literally January was like my Noam month. And I think it just spurred from there, I guess.
So that's very interesting, I think, because even just for me, I guess it's revealing that it wasn't just a sort of, initial sprinkle of leftism. It was a deep dive, because Noam Chomsky gets into some theory quite deeply, and he makes statements that, I mean, if somebody wasn't in that world, if somebody wasn't doing a lot of reading and a lot of his work, if somebody wasn't a leftist, it might sort of strike you in the moment and be like, whoa, did he just say that? Like he will often refer to the United States military as a terrorist organization. Not directly, but he would be like, they're frightening and scary. And he would kind of go against the US sort of global power that they hold. And so for you, I guess then it was less about being shocked by that and more just about being like, actually, I want to go a little bit deeper into this. Was there ever a moment for you where you were like, this seems a bit kooky, this seems a bit wild, let me just retreat back into what I know? Was there ever a moment like that for you?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think like possibly because I am like already a minority group because of the school we went. Like at least in our school context, we're already a minority group. We know what it's like to like not be a part of the status quo type. I guess the dominant quote unquote class in that society, and being able to be an underdog in one situation might let you.
You were very quickly able to understand how one thing led to another because those things had led to your oppression, so to speak, within the school space. As a person of color.
I feel like the oppressed. As someone who was like previously oppressed, I feel like it's easier as for someone who's experienced oppression or like hardship or like any aspect of unokayness to be more sympathetic or empathetic rather to another situation. And Noam makes really good arguments, and I didn't think he was kooky. I mean, to me it just made sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I had Adam and Nima in my ear who already primed me with some media criticism, and Noam just like
solidified it.
There was no point where I was just like, no, this is just like, that's it.
Okay, cool. So then, because this is where I think our worlds collide in a very interesting way, because I guess this is maybe one more question to you that might help you go go further into this, which is, it seems like your foray into leftism was basically through media and media scrutinization and media analysis and trying to be more critical about it, right? And also recognizing the ways in which the media and also institutions utilize their power to, in a very real way, propagandize us into a certain way of thinking so that we can be primed to accept certain things that are unacceptable, which is in a very broad way Noam Chomsky's whole argument, which is like, you are going to be fed a bunch of shit so that when this shit happens, you can be like, oh, that's fine, instead of being like, wait, hang on, that's a problem. So that was that initially your entrance into this?
Yeah, definitely was. I mean, once he explains the thing, how you only have like 30 seconds to make your point, and you can't make a complex point about how this coup happened because of these people in 30 seconds. So you can't even defend your position. You can't advocate for something that is against the status quo in 30 seconds.
Right.
So like by default, that just that benefits the status quo. And then just like the knowledge that there's this side that I am not hearing from, who are actually making good points that I actually do agree with. So let me just figure out what's happening here,
right,
and how much I do or don't agree. And yeah, definitely a media side angle. But I mean, just so listeners know, it was more than just Noam. I think we're going to drop a list. Are we going to drop a list at some point of stuff we're
going to drop a list for sure.
We'll probably include some in this description also.
Yeah. It seems then that like the entryway for you was largely to do with media and I guess sort of scrutinizing institutions. And the reason why I think there was an overlap between yourself and I is because my entry into leftism was more from an academic sense, like more from a sort of sociological, philosophical, like very theory-based leftism. And the reason why I think us having the conversations that we do were so important is because I think the fusion of the type of leftism that you were engaging with and the type of leftism that I was engaging with allowed a really good overlap for us to kind of see the world from a more in-depth type of perspective. Like it challenged us to really, because I guess I'll speak specifically for myself. Maybe this didn't happen to you, but I'll give the listeners a breakdown of my foray. So I studied sociology. I did it in undergrad, postgrad, and so I studied it for 6 years. I think it's fair to call myself a sociologist now. And initially I had no idea what sociology was. I was entering the humanities pretty much on blind faith and just being like, I think this would be cool because they do a lot of social sciencey stuff. And then I got introduced to sociology, which for those listeners who don't know what sociology is, which by the way is not a knock. Most people don't actually know what sociology is, even sociologists. It's hard for us to define ourselves. What is sociology? What does it mean? But in summary, it's really just an analysis, and many people will argue against me on this because there is no strict definition, but it's really just an analysis on people, societies, and the way the world functions. Because sociologists tend to believe that a lot of systems, a lot of things that we take for granted are all human creations. They're all made up. We all just kind of decided and agreed upon these societal rules and laws. And so sociology is a way to kind of examine or explore these systems and these practices in a very critical way. Why do we do that? Why do we engage with that? Why is it that we take these things for granted? Why is it that we all just agree that money is a thing? Because money, like most things, is made up. It's fake. It's just an agreement between people. If we all woke up tomorrow and decided money is invaluable,
they're guns. They are
guns. Yeah, that's very real. And actually, that's a very interesting and important point. Is that sociologists don't think that everything is made up and therefore nothing matters and nothing has any material effect. It's more so that we have to recognize the context in which everything takes place. Kamala Harris quote: "You weren't born in a coconut tree. You are a product of everything that came before you and everything that exists in and around you." And so even while we might say things like race is a social construct, money is a social construct, that doesn't take away from the realities of said things. Now, how did that sort of shift me or move me towards leftism? Well, unsurprisingly, that's pretty much what Karl Marx did in his work. His entire exploration of capitalism was literally that. It was him going, hey, look at this thing and what it is doing to people. Look at how it's alienating the workers. Look at the systems and the structures in place that are essentially pushing people towards a deeper alienation away from their labor, away from their work, and they're not being compensated for it. And that push is ultimately going to lead to some form of societal degradation or collapse. So there was a lot of Marxism explored in sociology. We would read sociologists like Foucault and Weber and Gramsci, and I could list them all. But it was a very deep deep and analytical lens into systems and the way things worked. However, and this is where I think it's particularly interesting for me, is that at no point did I ever, because I think lecturers, they try to do a good job at linking it to the real world, but I think like most academics, lecturers get too lost in the source. They love reading theory and they're interested in theory, so they'll analyze the theory. They'll get very into the nitty gritty of it, right? What are they arguing? What are they saying? How can this argument be better? How can you, they very rarely extrapolate it into the real world. So for me, there was never any point where I went, oh, this analysis of this thing, this is how it's affecting me in the real world right now. Whether or not that's the lecturer's fault or my fault and my brain's inability to sort of put two and two together, I don't know. But there was just that there was an almost detachment from what was going on in what we were learning to what was going on in what we were experiencing. That wasn't until my post-grad and I was in my honors year, which was 2020, right around the time you started listening to Noam Chomsky. And 2020, COVID was very interesting because we were all stuck inside. We were all trying to figure out things to do and what we wanted to engage with. And this is where I say the overlap comes in, because you were the one who introduced me to Noam Chomsky. And I think Noam Chomsky was such a pivotal part to why I'm a leftist today. Not necessarily like his work as an individual. It's not like I went and read Chomsky and was like, okay, cool, I'm a leftist now. But it's more to say that all of the pieces to the puzzle before Chomsky were essentially just a bunch of different pieces. And then post-Chomsky and engaging with Ilan Pappé as well, through Israel-Palestine and engaging with that work and with those texts, with going over Citations Needed, which I believe you were the one who introduced me to Citations Needed, but also going through other podcasts, and I can't remember them off the top of my head now, but I was starting to go down the podcast route. I was like, oh, I read this. This is this theory, and this is this person's work, and this is the analysis that Foucault did on this, and this is the, you know what I mean? I was putting two and two together, and it was finally a moment for me to go, oh, hang on, they're talking about Marxism. Why is it that I still hear communism and I kind of, retreat? I'm like, communism sucks. Communism failed. You know, that typical sort of standard, communism didn't work. Show me an example of communism working, whatever. And I used to say that with pure confidence. And one of my tutors, who is now actually a very good friend of mine, he was reading one of my papers, and I kind of shat on communism, and he was like, whoa, hold your horses, 1 second, you don't know what communism is, you don't actually know what Marx was saying, and you might have studied it in a theoretical sense, but this analysis that you've given is not actually the critique you think it is. And that sort of pushed me towards going, hang on, what does he mean by that? So then I went and started reading Marx again, and I was like, oh, hang on, Marx is about labor. His theory is about how people's relationship to labor, people's relationship to capital, the way that people relate to each other, and how we need to essentially work together, which sounds like a sort of kumbaya type thing, and I'm butchering a Marxian analysis here, but it's more sort of a way to recognize that we need to come together to fight against the capitalists, because they're essentially extracting as much profit from our labors as possible.
I think, could we pause there? Because just that how do capitalists do that?
How do capitalists do that?
Yeah, like how is like the extraction? How does that occur?
Right. So
I mean, because people,
No. That's a great question. So, and please, for those of you who are actual Marx scholars, if you are listening to this, hopefully they pay enough respect to our podcast that they do listen to it. If I butcher it, I do apologize. But in essence, Marx's argument is that the crux of the tension under capitalism is that capitalists and the owners of capital, that is people who own factories, people who own, like Jeff Bezos, for instance, or Elon Musk, or people who own the means of production, they are constantly in tension with their workers, because what they want is to pay the workers as little as possible to earn as much profit as possible. And the laborers are in constant contention with the capitalists, because they are trying to earn as much money as possible while producing their labor. They're trying to essentially have that reflected back onto them. Now, what should happen, and what Marx argues, is that the workers should own the means of production. The workers are the ones who produce these things. If you fire your workers, you're not going to be able to produce that shirt. If you fire your CEO, chances are you're going to produce that shirt, because the laborers are able to actually, do that work without the existence of a CEO or whatever. And that can lead down into many different arguments. So what's happened in the past, and that has kind of led us to this point, is that capitalists keep winning. They keep winning the system of capitalism, which is essentially paying off legislators, ensuring that certain systems stay in place, ensuring that unions and labor unions don't, well, first of all, form through union busting. And the way that this is done is essentially through lobbying, which is the United States' way of just, it's legalized corruption is what it is. I am paying you to sign off a legislation that's going to help me in the US Senate or whatever it might be.
Well, not you, I guess your campaign in your office or whatever. So it's a level of abstraction.
And we don't see that as corruption. And what that's ultimately done is it's allowed the cost of labor to remain as cheap as possible so that the capitalists can earn as many profits as possible. Certain things that you might not see that were won by labor unions and laborers and workers striking is, for instance, the 5-day work week. People used to work much longer than 5 days, actually, having only Sunday off. And so what they did was they pushed to have Saturday off as well and a little bit of Friday. That way you work throughout the week and then you can get Saturday and Sunday off. And not just that, children used to be laborers and allowed to work. They fought against child labor and things of that nature. So there's certain things that we appreciate now, having a flat rate fee for a minimum wage, ensuring that workers are fairly treated in terms of healthcare, ensuring that housing is affordable and their wages reflect that, ensuring that they're able to eat, ensuring that they can get lunch breaks, which is huge because people didn't used to get lunch breaks. So labor unions were extremely pivotal in winning certain rights that we take for granted today, and that's essentially what Marx is trying to sort of point towards.
And I guess I just wanted to call back to earlier, where just to add on to what you were saying with how capitalists influence the legislator or the legislative bodies. And the addition I'd only like to make is that the legislators themselves may also be capitalists, either just ideologically or by virtue of that they have capital that is earning them income. Our president, South Africa's president, is a billionaire. In America, you have there's a whole thing about stock trading going on within the Congress. And I think it was Nancy Pelosi who was asked, should Congress members not be allowed to trade stocks? And she was like, well, no, it's capitalism. It's a fair system,
Right.
We should be able to participate in this market, So I think that there is also an aspect of their own ideology helping them advance these certain aspects. Because, a corollary, I don't know, the opposite side of that would be, how do you get socialists in power? You just get people who believe in socialism, who have that ideology behind them. So just an additional component to the motivations behind the legislators.
Yeah. And I wanted to add to that as well. No, that's important. That's important because what you speak to there is class consciousness. And Marx always said that class consciousness is often at its strongest. Actually, I don't know if this was Marx. Maybe it was somebody else, and I'm attributing it to Marx. Maybe we shouldn't deify him. Class consciousness is often at its most powerful and strongest amongst the elite because they fundamentally are aware that if things remain exactly as they are, then they will be the most happy. They will be the most successful in that regard. It's even unspoken. Their class consciousness, there's a recognition there. And we would include members of Congress, governors, whoever it might be that might be part of the government system, are in recognition that the maintenance of the system as is fundamentally working for them. Therefore, nobody has to tell me to sign a legislation that is going to benefit me because I'm going to do that anyway, because that's where the class consciousness lies. So Marx says there is that separation between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, which is the working force, the laborers, the people who are not owners of capital. And I think that was such an important thing to learn, which is interesting for me in particular because it was the first time, and that was in 2020. Mind you, we had gone over this in the sociology of work in second year, but I never really registered what that meant. That was my first real recognition that okay, so class consciousness works in this way. And the introduction to media analysis and being critical of the way that the sort of empire that is the United States functions is very class conscious. So that's kind of how I feel like our worlds fused in that moment, which I think was perfect for me because it forced me to put those two together and be like, oh, so this isn't just a theoretical analysis of the 1800s or 1900s. This is a real life thing that can be applied to the world as it exists today. And for me, it was important to be like, okay, stop. Everything that you've ever learned, maybe start to ask questions, not like conspiratorial questions, just general questions. And for me, it's important to recognize that, like, I shouldn't be the one asking these questions because way smarter people than me have asked these questions already, right? They've already done it. That's what I'm reading. That's what I'm engaging with. So are there any more smart people that I can listen to, that I can engage with, that I can read, that will actually answer a lot of these questions that I have for me? And the answer is yes. And that's essentially how I got to where I got to. And that's how I became a socialist.
I mean, the beautiful thing about it is that you end up learning things that you didn't even mean to learn.
Yeah.
Like, you're like, let me read this book about bullshit jobs, for example. And then you learn, I mean, okay, wait, I don't have an example to give about what you learn. But that's a very good book. It's by David Graeber. If you're listening, it's a very good book. My mind just gave you a blank. So yeah, no, I was just saying that you just become hungry to learn more, I guess, because I feel like there's a sense inside you where it's like, oh no, the system doesn't work. And once you find out the ways it doesn't work, you also are learning also the questions you should ask in trying to make it better, right? You're learning tools that you can use to hopefully make it better, if not for you, but for society in a broader sense. I feel like if more people had the tools, had the ability to, I mean, basic media analysis, I mean, like, why is this story being covered in this way? You know, I think it would lead to a more, I don't even know what word to use because I don't want to sound patronizing, but it's because there's also an aspect of like your life is hectic. Like people are at work from like 9 to 5. They generally don't have time to engage in politics. So it's like, well, on top of like my job and my kids and like all these other things, now I must be doing XYZ. But like, I'm also like, maybe, you know, like maybe we could just make our lives better. Maybe.
I mean, yeah, no, but you bring up a great point because that is actually, and oh God, I need to find the name of this book. But this is the problem with reading a lot of texts, is that you often forget who wrote it and where you should direct people to. But one of the functions of capitalism is that it takes up so much of your time. And actually, to be fair, this is a Marxian thought, which is that your time in your day is taken up so much by your job, by your bosses, that you have no time to think about how they're screwing you. There is no time to think about it. There is no time to observe how to change it. There is no time to come together and be like, hey guys, this is fucked up. Because you're constantly thinking about the fact that at the end of the day, you just want to get home. For some people, drink a beer. For others, it's just watch a series or read a book or something, just to get your mind off of the fact that you've had a really shitty day, and then you're starting it again the next day, right? And so that's ultimately one of the symptoms of alienation that Marx was discussing. But one thing that I wanted to bring up as well is that this very interesting moment for me. So I was in my third year of uni and I was in a room with a couple of friends of mine, and one of them had the Communist Manifesto, and we were like, what are you reading that for? Why are you reading that? And he goes, oh, I'm a communist. And my friend and I were like, you're a what? He's like, I'm a communist. And I was like, that's insane. What are you talking about? What do you mean you're a communist? That doesn't make any sense. Communism is bad. We know this. Like, this is just what everybody is aware of. And he was like, no, in large part you think that because of propaganda. And at the time, hearing that word also made me be like, whoa, how like conspiratorial are you? Like, dude, what do you mean propaganda about communism? We know that communism is a failed system. Think about all the countries that failed under communism. Think about how bad communism is in general. Like, come on, dude, people died. That's what the whole Cold War was about and shit. Like, these are words coming out of my mouth. The same person, by the way, who had just engaged with Marx and shit in classes before. You know what I mean? And after that, I remember him just saying kind of, it wasn't as poignant as this. I think it just kind of hit me in that way. And you know how you misremember things, or you add details later to yourself. But he was so calm and collected in his thoughts and in what he was saying that he believed in. And another part of me was also like, I know him. He's not an insane person. He's not a crazy person. Sorry to use that term, that's ableist. And so when I look at him saying what he's saying, and he genuinely believes what he's saying, I am now truly intrigued as to why he fundamentally believes what he believes in, which is why I take interest in certain religions as well. I while being an atheist, I can recognize the power of religion in convincing people, and sort of the importance of religion to society and everything.
No, I agree.
So I went in there and I was like, okay, cool, this is going to force me to engage with this. And it kind of, looking back on it now, it was like literally, it was like 6 months later, which was, when we found our moments where it was like 2020 and all that shit was happening. And I was like, holy shit, he was right this whole time. And he was just like so calm about it. And we were like attacking him. And I was like, I felt like a deep sense of embarrassment because I was like, I planted my flag. Remember the previous episode, I said, if you're going to plant your flag, you better be willing to defend it. I planted my flag and I was like defending it vehemently without any actual genuinely true arguments. And he was just like, yeah, man, that's not true. What you're saying is a lie. And here's why. This is what communism actually is, and here's why that's not true, etc., and so on. And I was just like stubbornly like, what are you talking about? And like, I think it's important to recognize that feeling of embarrassment, because it's okay. Like, it's fine to hold a position and then later down the line be like, oh, I was wrong about that position, I needed to change it. And I texted him and I was like, yo, I'm a socialist now. I'm not a communist, but I'm a socialist now, and I want you to know that, like, I'm sorry for coming at you, because I am now on your side. I'm now fully in your boat. I'm in it now.
I took the pill.
Yeah. And he was like, yeah, I guess that's kind of what happened to me too. He was like, that's the same thing that happened to me.
It's the pipeline.
Yeah, it was a realization that the default for a lot of us is to see capitalism as both morally and structurally this be all and end all. It is the thing. It's almost like it was ordained by God to be the system of humanity and existence, right? So you kind of take that position and you want to defend it when somebody's like, I don't believe in that system,
And you know what's crazy about that is that society has, like, there've been so many different ways we organize society.
Yeah.
And that, like, this is the one. It's just like, that's so like hubristic. Like, why?
Right.
Like, why is this the apex? Like why, like we're gonna do this for like 1,000, like, is this what we're gonna do until like the earth dies, heat death? Like, you're being serious? Like we're just gonna do another version of capitalism? Like, what? Like...
Right. And it's so funny because it's like, it was also my, and to be fair, I wanna, because this is also really important, and why we say it was like a long journey instead of just like a one-time thing. These 6 months that it took me to kind of put two and two together were not where I was like, okay, cool, I am a staunch believer in this. It was beyond that moment of, because obviously my specialization was in race, colonization, gender, and also class and the way class structures function. I was doing a lot of reading on South Africa and the sort of colonial process that it underwent over the 400 years or 500 years between 1600s and now. And a lot of what they were doing, a lot of what was, the structures and the systems that they were producing were systems of exploitation, which, Marx and other people have argued is precisely what capitalism is. It's just a very different form of slavery. It's a very different form of exploitation. And so I was able to be like, oh, so capitalism is just this, except in its own sort of new form. And that's when, neoliberalism kind of came into the conversation for me, and sort of learning about neoconservatism and just like recognizing that like a lot of the systems, like we said in the previous episodes, were as a result of things that came before us. It happened in the past, and they are essentially children of those things. And they've morphed and they've changed into a very nefarious way to kind of be like, hey, look at how different and new things are, while ultimately not actually changing much of what came before. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense.
Yeah.
I actually had a thought in the middle of what you had just said, and it left my mind.
Exploitation.
No, it was the exploitation. Yes. Yeah. Did you see my face do something when you said that or something? Look, it's like just the very basic, because you said this earlier, like, but on the very basic like level, like, you wouldn't be paid if it cost you more, if you wouldn't be employed if it costs more to hire you than it does than you bring in. Like for that to work, they always have to make more money from you, and that is where the exploitation is. That there's that gap in the value you produce and the value you end up capturing. And I guess we could say that it's never going to be 100% if you are working in a collective with a thing that has to get other things. But you're not making the decision as to how that pie is split. You just get what you are given, and you have to live. It can be, it can be a gigantic gulf between what you produce and, what you produce as in the money the owner of said organization, company gets from your labor, like the actual money that gulf can be quite big.
It's not even that it can be quite big, it's that it is very big, right? It's huge. And And that's ultimately what, I guess, in the US, we're seeing the sort of pushback towards it. Starbucks is unionizing. The workers of Starbucks are unionizing. The workers of Amazon have been trying to unionize for years. And one of the things that Hassan Piker, who is someone who also got me a lot into leftism, because I watched a lot of
Did I introduce him to you? I feel like I might have.
I think you might have.
I feel like
I think you might have. Don't take too much credit here. Don't take all the credit here. Don't. Something that he always said was that, like, if unions were unsuccessful, if unions were so bad, if unions were so terrible to the system, then why do capitalists spend so much money trying to shut it down, right? I mean, there was even one year where it was revealed that, I think it was Amazon. I don't want to keep going at Amazon. Actually, no, fuck that. They're a multi-billion-dollar corporation. They don't care. They had spent more money on union busting than the unions were asking for in their deals to come to the table so that they could be paid.
That is brilliant.
They were literally spending more money, which means then that the capitalists recognize that it is better to spend more money shutting this shit down now in the short term than it would be to pay these workers what they're asking for, because in the long term we're ultimately going to be losing more money. Like, that's how deep this is. And I think it's important for people to recognize that that's all the conversation that we're trying to have is. It's like what communists are asking for in large part is essentially, and actually let me not speak for communists, let me rather say for socialists, is essentially just a way for workers to own their labor. A way for workers to recognize that, like, the shit that we're making, we're important to that, and we just want to be compensated for that. We don't want 100% of it, because obviously you'll get someone who will come here and be like, yeah, but they need to make a profit. How are they gonna, it's not gonna be a successful business if they can't make a profit, which is understandable. We're not saying they shouldn't make a profit. We're just saying that they're making so much more fucking money than their workers are.
Like, you know how much CEOs are paid? Like, CEO worker pay, like the pay gap is just like, it's ballooned.
It has,
like, from like a few decades ago.
So much. Actually, I believe it's from the 80s, Ronald Reagan, of course. And this is, of course, US specific in large part of the conversations that we're having. But it's important to understand this, because I do believe that the United States is the quintessential number one example.
The beacon on top of the hill.
Yeah. Capitalism. Like, if you need a capital C capitalism, you need the captain of that team, you need someone to point to, it's them. And it's a very clear and visible example as to why that system itself is unsuccessful. So yeah, that was just to add to your point earlier about the exploitation. It's like workers are just saying, hey, we just want to be able to afford to eat. We just want to be able to afford to live.
Yeah, but I was messaging you there was a voice note the other day where, because I have an app, and I was like, no, I want to own my own means of production. Like, I'm just like, no, I am tired of this, like, vibe of, like, exploitation. Like, I'm tired of feeling like I deserve more than what I get. I'm tired of that feeling. So I just rather have it be, I can see. I'd rather have it be more direct and have more control over that.
Yeah. And one of the things that I wanted to say as well to that is that, like, okay, so maybe let's not use your case, but let's use a different case, because sometimes people have asked me, well, Mukisa, can you give me a concrete example of what it is that you believe in? Because it might be, enough to just kind of speak about these things broadly, but how does it work in the real world? Let's say, for instance, you want to start a business, but the only way you can start a business is, you take out a loan from the bank and you say, I only have this much money to pay my workers, so they need to essentially earn less than the minimum wage. Well, then you shouldn't own a business. You shouldn't be running a business. If you can't afford to pay your workers... If you can't afford to pay your workers a living wage, if your workers need to work two jobs, if they need to freaking struggle to pay their rent, if they need to, whatever it might be, those essentials, which is housing, healthcare, and food security, if you can't afford to pay your workers enough that their lives are comfortable on those three fronts, then you cannot own a business. That is what having a business should mean. But what is ultimately occurring is people are starting businesses through exploitation. They're saying, we can only afford to pay you this much, so hey, how about you make some more off of tips? If you're a good waiter or waitress, or if you work in that service industry, then hey, we can't pay you, but how about you get paid from tips? That way you can be smiley and happy-go-lucky and whatever. And it's like, no, they're exploiting you as a worker. Like, that restaurant can't afford to stay afloat without paying you its services, meaning you have to recognize that restaurant is exploiting you, that they're taking advantage of you as a worker. And they recognize that because if, say, for instance, workers decided, you know what, we're going to quit en masse until you start to pay us fairly, most restaurants would have to shut down. most restaurants would have to stop their work because they can't afford to. And that's where you recognize the reality of the situation, of the system that you live in. Is that if that's the reality, then that shouldn't be the case in any way. So yeah, hopefully that's enough of a concrete example. I'm sure in the conversations that we have in the future, more things will come up, like worker co-ops and sort of workers mobilizing together to be able to not just unionize, but just be able to recognize the value of their labor and trying to sort of negotiate with their managers and so on and so forth, how it is that they might earn a little bit more money. But really, that's essentially like what we as leftists are asking for on an economic front. On an economic front, it's like pay your workers. That's really what we're wishing for. And then more on a social front, it's like just care for one another a little bit better. Holy shit, like stop caring for yourself as an individual, you know?
Yeah, so just in lieu of that AI chat, I think that I just want to just like acknowledge how radical the people in Dune were. I mean, the other day I tweeted that they weren't just like, guys, stop using computers.
Yeah.
Like, you did see.
I saw your tweet,
cool.
yeah.
Interesting. I didn't see a like, but so...
Not you shaming me for not liking your tweets.
Like, they were so like, you were so oppressed by these machines that you decided that, like, no, we're going to, not only we're going to destroy them all, we're going to make humans superhuman. We're going to have humans that can, like, calculate in their minds better than computers ever could. We're going to have humans that can see the future because they had this, like, spice thing.
Right.
Like, fold space. I mean, it's just like, so, it's like, no, like, fuck these computers.
Yes,
Me, the guy who makes an app, the guy who literally is on a computer all the time. Like, fuck these computers. We can do better. We are so, like, we can make ourselves sick. And then we have the Benny Dressers who are just like, I mean, I don't know. Like, I think they're just sick. They're sick. I mean, they're
phenomenal.
They got their plans.
Yeah, I stand for women's rights and women's wrongs, and the Benny Dressers are a perfect example of
of both.
Of both, yes. Our plans work in generations. Like, oh my goodness. Like, whoa, okay, jeepers. Oh my goodness, what a show. But I did want to say that, like, because I also saw another tweet that was interesting and in relation to what you just said, which is that, like, and maybe we'll have like a proper episode where we discuss AI. But in relation to this, the tweet was basically just saying that, like, people who are against technology, so to speak, or who are fighting against its sort of, improvement and constant increase.
Oh, Luddism.
Right, Luddites. They weren't against technology because technology itself is inherently evil or bad. They were just recognizing that the technology was replacing their labor, and the capitalists were able to earn more money by utilizing this technology. But what that is essentially doing is creating a massive gap in between people who can afford to just exist and those who can afford to essentially live in this world that is of abundance, basically, right? So that's what it is, really. It's like we're not against technology.
It's not just we're not against. It's like the role of like that technology is playing in the society. If it's going to replace the labor, what happens to the people who needed that labor to live?
Exactly.
Like, what happens to them?
Exactly.
Like, people say just get along with, like, learn to code. I'm sorry, you don't need that. Like, there can only be so many coders.
Yeah.
And even at that point, like, there's AI now that can make code. I mean, like, everyone coding is not the solution. The solution is a holistic one where we come together on a large societal scale and decide that we should all have good lives to live, decent lives to live, lives not where one person is worth hundreds. How rich is Elon? Can I say hundreds of billions?
Hundreds of billions. 100 billion?
How much money is it? Hundreds of billions. And then in the same fucking block, probably the same a 5-mile radius around him, there's someone who is like begging for money. Yeah. And like that society is atrocious.
Exactly.
Like, I mean, you don't even have to go that extreme, but I mean, that extreme is just a poignant example.
Yeah. Or someone sleeping in their car or something. But you're absolutely right. Because just to add to what you were saying is that, like, this is why I said to someone once that I do, like, the reason why I'm a leftist is economically what we discussed in this episode, but I think morally is what essentially I'm about to say. In this society, we've established that in order to acquire resources, you need money, right? We've agreed that money is made up, but we've all agreed that it's a thing of value, and that thing of value can buy water, can buy food, can buy you a house, and can buy you healthcare, right? These are the 4 essentials to surviving. Now, in a world where in order to acquire the essentials to survive, you need to work for those things, it is unethical that billionaires can be earning the amount of money that they're earning while millions upon millions, in fact billions of people on this earth are struggling to get said water, food, healthcare, and housing. That to me is unethical. It shouldn't exist, because money is, like most things, is finite. It's not infinite. I mean, we've agreed that it's finite. If we wanted it to be infinite.
I'm an you could just print money,
right?
I don't think literally. America.
Yes, America. They do that. They print more money, right? But let's assume money is finite, right? Let's pretend it is. Okay. At a certain point, you have to recognize that in order for someone to earn billions, it means other people have to earn less than they can to survive. That gap is what, to me, is unethical. And that is why I'm now a staunch socialist and why I believe in leftism. It's because I'm not arguing that, I am arguing that billionaires shouldn't exist. I'm not arguing that somebody shouldn't make a lot of money. Leftism isn't a poverty cult. We're not talking about everybody should be living in dire straits. What we're saying is that in order for the very few 1% to live the way that they live, millions upon millions of people have to struggle daily just for basic essentials. Just for basic survival in this world that we've agreed that money is essential to existing. Which means then that what you're morally arguing is that to have money is to be human, is to live a valuable life, is to live a life of abundance and enjoyment. And to not have money means you don't deserve that on a moral standpoint and just on a general basic economic and whatever standpoint. So I look at that, to me, that one-to-one, and I recognize that most things that we are going to engage with in this podcast and most things that we're going to discuss are going to be very gray area. That to me is something that I cannot make a gray area. That is very black and white to me. If money is finite and money is what buys resources, then if you're depriving people of those resources, you're saying it's okay to have them die. And I am not okay with that. I am not comfortable with that, and that's why I eventually took the position that I took.
I think you could also take that position if you don't think money is finite. I mean, if money is infinite, then why?
True, yeah.
Because they talk about I'm talking about America in particular because who is going to make America pay its bills? No one can make America. Who has the power to enforce this? It's like who? So literally, we're just in debt to future generations. And what kind of world do we want to live? What are we indebting them for? Do we want to debt them for one person to be poor while millions, billions to be poor while very few are living in abundance? Or do we want a more holistic society where people have healthcare, people have food, people have education, people actually want to do jobs, right, even if they don't earn money? Right. Funnily enough, people like doing things. People don't just sit around on their couches all day.
And the example of that is billionaires, because all of them are still working.
Yeah, and their kids who... we went to school with a billionaire who is now working. He's working, and it's just well, duh. Dude has a trust fund, but obviously he's going to work because he's a human, and people like being productive. I think we just like doing things. I just think I don't know, it must be some sort of I don't know what it is that makes people think, or some people think that, if you give the poor money, they're just going to be lazy. I don't understand what that thought is. I don't understand what's behind it.
Propaganda.
It's just wrong and dangerous. It's propaganda too. Yeah. Yeah.
But you're right. It is wrong and dangerous.
It could also, it's probably racialized as well.
Oh,
it definitely
deeply racialized. Deeply racialized. Holy shit. Yeah. But this is what I mean by it's also a moral argument, because I think people often look at, and I think we can do an episode on these conversations, but of colonization. People often look at colonization and think it was just a process of we've got guns, so we're going to force you to work for us and we're going to steal your land and whatever. In order to justify their actions, in order to justify a lot of what they did, the British, the Portuguese, the Spanish, whoever the fucking colonizers were, they used to use religion as a moral justification. They used to say, these people do not believe in God, which is, first of all, factually incorrect. They believed in their own gods and whatever practices they were sort of practicing indigenous to their people and to their ways. But they didn't view that correctly, because to Europeans there is only one God. They were like, this is our God and this is the God that you need to believe in. So they would say, these people do not believe in God, therefore they are not human. They are not one of us. They haven't elevated their status to human. Therefore what we're doing to them is for their own good, i.e. killing them, raping them, pillaging them.
It sounds very familiar to something that's happening in our current context.
Exactly. Insert Palestine here. So killing them, raping them, pillaging them, utilizing them for labor and exploiting them as much as possible is all entirely justifiable, because morally speaking, what we're doing is the good thing. We're trying to turn them into humans. human beings that can be seen and valued in the eyes of the Lord. And of course, that is an impossible task. Of course, that is something that is never going to be achieved. But people often forget that this pursuit of individual financial quote unquote success, this pursuit of profit, this pursuit of this idea of success under a capitalist society is almost always tied to this moral idea of being the ideal human being. That's why there's so many freaking zealots that believe in Elon Musk as a person. Can't do any wrong. There's so many people that feel that way with Bezos and Zuckerberg, and they're seen as these gods in many similar ways. And that's why so many people have argued that they are now the new monarchs. They are they're the kings and queens of our time. And I think that's so important for people to understand, because it's like what you're essentially doing is this idea of morality is being utilized against our collective understanding that people need to be treated the same and equally and fairly. And I think the last thing I wanted to point out, because I think we're running this episode really long, although it's been quality content.
Got a task ahead of you.
The last thing that I wanted to point out is that often people will come to me and they will say to me, hey, but Mukisa, the world is not fair. Not everybody is going to be treated fairly. Not everybody should be treated fairly. Whoever's saying that is probably insane, but whatever, we'll assume that there's a person that exists that's saying that. And I've actually heard from many people who have said that, like, yeah, but this is the way the world works, and it's unfair. Things are going to be unfair. For me,
so lazy.
Yeah, 2 points on that. Firstly, if the world is indeed unfair, then why is it so wrong for me to ask for something different? Why can't this unfair world be unfair to the 1%? Why does it need to be unfair to 99% of the population? That doesn't jive with me. I don't understand that. That doesn't make sense. So that's a completely bullshit argument. And the second thing is that for me, one of the biggest things that I often tell people is, yes, this is the way the world works, but it doesn't have to be. That's literally, I was even going to tell you that should be the motto of our podcast. It doesn't have to be this way. The way that we are currently living has literally only been in existence for the last 1,000 maybe years, and we're talking about the sort of formation of monarchies and so on and so forth, the structures and systems that have come. That's maybe been the last 1,000 years. And people often come to me and say, hey, Mukisa, but this is just human history. This is just the way humans have worked. Humans have been around for 200,000 odd years, as in the sort of form that we exist in now. So you can't look at the last 1,000 years and be like, yeah, but that's just the way the world works, because it's not. There's just the way that we understand the world to work, from the history that we can work with, that we can comprehend. But there was a period of time where humans existed in a very different and very real communal sort of way. So that to me is also bullshit. So you can't come to me and tell me that this is the way the world works, because I can give you ample evidence to completely disprove that or dispel that statement. And I have to keep repeating, it doesn't have to be. And that's really just a message of hope that kind of keeps me going. Is that it just simply doesn't have to be.
Yeah, this is a world of our making. I mean, not our making, but it was made. It wasn't just so. Yeah, the things that you don't like, we can unmake them with enough time, with enough effort, with enough patience and collective action. We can build a society that we want to live in. It's a fight worth fighting, even if it's not going to realize in our generation. If it doesn't realize in our generation, who cares? Might realize the next one, or the next one, or the next one. I think it's a goal worth pursuing.
It's a goal worth fighting for. And I think in a sort of more selfish way, I think there's a part of me that wants to. We are currently existing in a time and a product of a future that people in the past century longer have essentially meticulously plotted out and planned out. And so the people that are currently succeeding are the offspring, nepo babies of said people who planned that, right? Like, we are currently in the throes, some would argue the sort of downfall of the United States empire and empires and neocolonialism and neoliberalism, etc. We are currently living amongst the thick of that because people in the past sort of built it up to be this way. I now want to be a part of the people who were in the past who built it up to be a much more successful system in the future, even if that future is 50 years from now, even if that future is 1,000 years from now. I just want to be able to recognize that my position in human history was not one of sort of defeatism and you're living in a capitalist society, so just fucking live under capitalism. It's like, no, bullshit. I don't need that, and I shouldn't have to.
No, I do not accept.
Exactly. I do not accept it. Those workers who died in the 40s and 50s and even in the 1800s, sort of fighting for our right to have a lunch hour, like, those workers died for a reason, and we are now, existing in a world where
we're benefiting from them.
Exactly. We're benefiting from that. We're existing in a world which they could not benefit, that they created. And so I think we should all take it upon ourselves to try to do that for whoever the next generation might be, as best as we can.
And we're both atheists, but I think that like there's something like special just about, I don't know, like what to like, I don't know, just like that hope for the future, that sense that you can plant a seed now, that you're a part of a tradition. And you acknowledge all the effort that has happened before you, and you are willing to, or you want to rather, be a part of a movement that is going to progress to make life even better for the people ahead of you, and the people ahead of them, and ahead of them, and ahead of them. Because you realize that it's not just you, that we're a part of, we're humans. I mean, it's not just me. It's me and those who came before me, and those who are with me, and those who will come after me. It's a collective.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to conclude the episode. This is a more hopeful ending, which won't happen often. I want our listeners to understand that leftism also implies a lot of... Okay, for those listeners who are not seeing the visual, he just flexed on us. Oh my God, he just flexed on us? I
actually stretched. And then,
okay.
I did this weird thing at gym, right? Like, I was dipping to my narcissism. Where I walk past the mirror and I'm just like, ooh, what? It was like, I was feeling dysmorphic today. I didn't know I look good.
Yeah, you're like, maybe just feel a bit good, I was feeling dysmorphic today. I've never heard someone use a sentence like that. That's brilliant. That's... Oh, that's hilarious. If we do release the visuals of this, you were just treated to a treat. If you missed it, just go follow him. He posts shit like that all the time. I wanted to make it clear to our listeners that a lot of leftism requires a lot of doomsday reading. Like, you will read a lot of shit that will send you spiraling into a deep, dark depression, into a deep dark hole that might make you think there's no way out, there's no way through this thing. And I think the only way to sort of live with that or sort of practice that is the practice of hope. Like, hope is not just a state of existence, it's a practice. You have to just constantly remind yourself that, like, you're doing this not selfishly for yourself but for others. There's this great quote in Andor, believe it or not, which is a show I will recommend throughout this podcast.
Andor is sick.
Because it's phenomenal. It is phenomenal, and it's a very good leftist like show. It's shocking.
Do you think like Star Wars people got that? Do you think they got like the leftist?
I don't think they did.
Because Star Wars is very
I think there's a lot of went over their heads like that. I feel like Star Wars is surprisingly fascist. The supporters of it. There's this great quote in Andor where one of the rebel fighters says that he's creating a sunrise that he'll never be able to see, in that sort of famous speech that he does. And it's like, that's fine. That's important that sunrise will still come, though, and it's important for you to be a part of the creation of that sunrise. Whether or not you see it, it's selfish. It's too individualistic. It's trying to see your life as this sort of meaningful thing that is more important than the existence of millions of others. And so if you have a voice, it's important to practice and use that voice in the best way possible.
So listeners, thank you for joining us on this week's episode of Pink Notice. You were joined by me, Akha, and my lovely, lovely host, Mukisa. We hope you enjoyed our discussion, and if you have anything to add, feel free to leave a comment either in the Substack comment block at the bottom there, or reach out to us on a social platform. Share this. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And what's a snarky thing I can say? Not snarky, but like a lefty funny thing. Go out there and seize the means.
Oh, seize the means. That's brilliant. Seize the means.
That could be seen as a call to action by some. Some might...
Why not, though?
It's not a call to violence. It is not one. Well, I am not going to call for violence on a public platform. Thank you very much. But listeners, thank you for joining us, and I hope you'll tune in for some more conversations. Bye.
Thanks, guys.